good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon which part of the world you're joining us from. Wonderful to have you all, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to CUTC's second webinar of the series on equity and the Black experience in transportation. I'm pleased that CUTC continues to receive support and the active encouragement of AASHTO, ACBA, ASCE, and the ENO Center for Transportation. So we already have discussed the objectives of the series, so I will not belabor this much, but I will say this on behalf of the entire CUTC Executive Committee. We are committed to expanding and diversifying our membership, and we will be more inclusive in our racial representation on the Executive Committee. This is a commitment that we make from the CUTC Executive Board. And also we hope that through this series, even as we propel ourselves into a society that we hope will be much more deep-rooted in the basic concept of human dignity for all, we also hope that this will lead to increasing societally relevant CUTC activities, both education-wise, technology transfer-wise, and research-wise. So toward this end, our first webinar had a panel of national leaders speaking on their lived-in experiences and their careers as Black individuals. The second webinar is going to focus more on defining the problem a little bit more concretely as it pertains to Black Americans, identifying equity and inclusion considerations, and trying to move us toward having representation from what our society looks like in our universities and in the leadership of transportation. And we'll also be discussing some actions at a federal level through modal administrations and TRB. The third webinar is intended to be sometime in May next month, and our own Carol Lewis will be moderating that, and that will take this further downstream to what CUTC membership can do. I do want to acknowledge the wonderful steering committee that really stood this entire series up: Sriraj, Melissa Tooley, Carol Abel Lewis, Juan Matthew, and Kemal Kamga. I would also be remiss if I did not thank Tracy Ulberg, who really has been the mastermind, if you will, in terms of coordination and logistics. So thank you to all of these members for their hard work and dedication to this effort. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce the moderator for today's webinar. Many of us know her, Dr. Anne Graf. She is the TRB Director of Technical Activities. She basically is the boss of the TRB annual meeting. She also coordinates all the technical activities division with federal agencies, with state agencies, and local agencies. She's got a vast amount of experience in interdisciplinary research and collaborative research. I will say this, something that I came to know very recently and very pertinent for this webinar series and well beyond, and combines the traditional engineering focus that many of us have with a more expansive societal and humanitarian empathy-based perspective through her combination of a PhD degree in engineering, but also a master's of psychology degree. So, that I think is a wonderful combination for this series and for transportation in all its glory. So I'm sure you all will agree that we could not have found a better moderator for this particular panel and this series. So without any further ado, let me hand it over to Anne. But before doing that, to all attendees, please do mute your microphones, and please do know that this session is being recorded. With that, Dr. Brath, it is all yours.
Thank you very much, Chandra. I do need to correct one thing. I have a master's degree in philosophy, not psychology.
That is right.
but it's not engineering. So thank you very much for your kind introduction, and welcome everyone to the second TIDE webinar. TIDE being transparency, inclusion, diversity, and equity. And as Chandra said, our focus today is on defining the problem. We are honored to have two very esteemed speakers, Brad Mims, Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Warren Whitlock, who served in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Civil Rights during the Obama administration. I encourage you to read about their extensive experience and accomplishments in their bios, which are posted on the webinar website. So before going any farther, just a little bit of housekeeping. We will address questions toward the end of the webinar, so you can put your questions in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. So before we hear from Deputy Administrator Mims and Mr. Whitlock, I have been invited to say a few words about TRB. In the first webinar, our Executive Director, Neil Peterson, provided a comprehensive overview of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives that TRB has been engaging in. So I thought I would talk about a few things that are more directly related to the part of TRB that I lead, which is the Technical Activities Division. As Chandra mentioned, that is the part of TRB that basically runs the 175 standing technical committees in all modes of transportation and a very wide array of disciplines, from engineers and planners to economists and data geeks and lawyers. So we have quite a wide array of people involved. We also plan and deliver the annual meeting every January and several smaller conferences during the year, and publish TRB's peer-reviewed journal, The Transportation Research Record. So I want to focus my comments on some aspects of defining the problem that I would categorize under the transparency part of TIDE in terms of their relationship to TRB's standing committees. So rather than, bragging some more about the things TRB is trying to do, we are trying to do many things. I thought a bit of transparency on what the problem looks like for me with my committees would be a good way to begin. I'm sure there are many ways of defining the problem, and I'm sure our speakers will give us very insightful ones. But one way of looking at the problem that we're dealing with cuts to the heart of what my part of TRB is about. We are supposed to be facilitating a national and international conversation about transportation research and innovation with a broad and diverse community, as broad and diverse as possible. To this end, we do track the membership of our committees in terms of gender and racial and ethnic background. So my first dose of transparency is to give you some numbers in that regard. From 2015 to 2020, the percentage of the standing committee members who self-identify as African American increased from 2.9% to 3.5%. That's a 21% increase from a very low number, and neither one of them is anywhere near the percentage of African Americans in the US. We have a slightly better situation among what we call our committee friends. Friends are people who can sign up to receive information about the committee's work and to become engaged in it. It's a way that we have of expanding engagement in the committees without making them so huge that they're unwieldy. And they are often the source of new committee members. Here, the percentage of self-identified African Americans went from 3.4% in 2015 to 4.5% in 2020, an increase of 32%, but still low. Committee chairs, is a relatively small number in comparison to members. We have something like 4,000 or 5,000 committee members, and we have 175 committees. Every year, a few committee chairs do rotate. This year, 38 positions rotated. And in that rotation, African-American chairs went from 3% to 5%. Again, it's a tiny bit better, and it's only a subset of the chairs. But see, this to me is a manifestation of the problem. Even an organization of national stature and renown doesn't really have the kind of representation that we should have on our committees. We work closely with our individual chairs as their committees come up for rotation. And every year we move the needle a little bit, but it really is a little bit. So stepwise improvements, which is great, but nothing to rest on our laurels about. We just instituted an award for committees that improve their diversity in order to encourage creativity in this area, and also to teach each other what their best practices are. We have special activities at the annual meeting for TRB's Minority Student Fellows and for Federal Highways Dwight D. Eisenhower Transportation Fellows, many of whom are from minority communities. So we're trying, but it needs to get better. A second aspect of transparency I would like to address is that for many people, the functioning of our committees is a bit opaque, a mystery, perhaps an old boys or even old girls kind of club. It does sometimes actually happen with women. Rarely, but it does sometimes happen. So I want to share a few bits of information that might be enlightening and hopefully encourage you to get more involved with TRB standing committees. And they are a wonderful opportunity for networking, professional development, being on the cutting edge of what's going on in your part of transportation. So it really is a very, it's great for us that you volunteer, and it's great for you that you volunteer. Our committees are the most open committees at TRB. They're huge. They can be as much as 36 members. They're mostly made up of established professionals, experts in their field, because we need that, right? But they also have slots on the committee that are designated for younger professionals. So you don't have to be the world's greatest expert in your area yet to serve on one of these committees. We also have this friends category, which is infinite. There are 14,000 friends and 4,000 committee members. You can sign up to be a friend of any committee you're interested in. There's no limit on the number of committees. And you can begin to participate in and benefit from that same engagement and professional development and networking. Second, another thing people don't necessarily know is that unlike all of the committees and panels at TRB, all the other ones, the committees in my unit are not, the members are not chosen by staff. There are too many committees and too few staff. So it's really important that the chairs and the other committee members and the rest of the community help us to improve our diversity, because it's not going to happen it's not going to happen through staff. We're just not enough people to go out there and meet more people. It's, I guess, the same pipeline problem that everyone has, but we don't have the ability to do things like recruit people and give them a scholarship or attract them in that way. So we need a little bit more help on the push side while we pull as much as we can. And then the third inside secret related to committee membership is the best thing you can do is demonstrate to a committee chair that you are someone who can be counted on to get the job done. Our committees do a ton of work. These are not honorific appointments. They're responsible for significant parts of the annual meeting, conferences. They review hundreds and hundreds of papers. It is a working kind of committee. So if you want to be involved and eventually become a committee member, sign up to be a friend, but contact the chair and volunteer. Volunteer to review papers or invite speakers or help write a research statement, research needs statement or something like that. When that committee's time comes to rotate, that chair is going to remember that you are a person that could be counted on. I think I have enough time to show you, that's the end of my comments, but I do want to show you, again, in the name of both transparency and teaching people to fish and being practical and not merely theoretical, I do have 2 slides to show on how you sign up to be a friend of one of our committees. So you should see here on the first slide, you go to www.trb.org. That's our website. And if you scroll down a little bit, you will see what I've circled here is a place where you can log into MyTRB and make yourself a MyTRB file. That's not the right way to put that. Anyway, join the MyTRB. Or if you already have it, click on the Become a Member. And what you will get to once you have a MyTRB account, that was the word I was looking for, is the ability, which I've also circled here, to click on a link here to become a friend of a standing committee. And that will open up, so on the right-hand side, a page that will give you a list of all of the committees and a few things that are not technically committees. And you can click on Become a Friend next to any one of those, scroll to the bottom and click Submit Changes. That's as easy as it is. And if Tracy wants to make this available on the website, I'd be happy that you do that, because we really want people to be involved and not just talk about people being involved. So now to our featured speakers. I'd like to start with Brad Mims. He's the Deputy Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Brad has quite extensive experience, having also been involved in FAA in the Clinton administration. So I would like to ask Brad how he defines the problem that we're dealing with. And in particular, how has he experienced it in his own career path? What kind of solutions has he seen that work? And what kinds of things has he seen, maybe changes between his first and second tour of duty at the FAA, that he has seen that have changed, or things that have really been useful solutions to the problem? So take it away, Brad.
Thank you so much, Anne. And I thank Tide and the council for inviting me here to speak with you and give a couple of other acknowledgements. One to my good friend, Neil Peterson, who runs the TRB. And as we have worked together in the past, one thing that I know he's committed to is the whole issue of equity, increasing people of color and others into the TRB organization and to transportation overall. And I thank him for that. I just hadn't seen my old friend Carol Lewis in quite a while. So hello, Carol, how are you? And then as we're going forward, my old buddy as well, Warren Whitlock, whom I'm serving on this panel with. And good to see you, Warren. And as you guys know, I am the past president and CEO of the Council of the Conference of Minority Transportation Officials. So I've been in this realm and will remain in this realm for the rest of my professional career in dealing with issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I want to acknowledge the Biden-Harris administration for the wonderful things that they are doing in the whole realm of diversity and inclusion. And I appreciate having the opportunity to serve in this administration. And as you've asked me, I'm going to roll back a little bit to the Clinton administration. And when I came to FAA, I was fortunate enough to serve as the head of government relations and industry affairs for the FAA, and was fortunate to see the comprehensive community in transportation. There were, and I'm going to focus on African Americans. There were African Americans who were very active at the FAA in dealing with, in their own ways, the whole issue of diversity and inclusion. And I think that there was a lot of progress there. But as I came out, dealing with what I've dealt with in the private sector, sometimes in the public sector, serving on boards, served on several boards in the state of Maryland and the Washington Metropolitan Airports Authority, I started to see a wane of commitment, if I could put it that way, to the whole issue of diversity and inclusion. Yes, African Americans were serving in those organizations, but that arc to climb was stymied, if I can put it that way. And it was something that really, really concerned me. And coming back into this role as deputy administrator, I am really pleased that I was asked by this administration to give special focus on the issue of equity and inclusion. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to continue to do it. For those of the folks in the community who don't know what equity is, I I would admonish you to take a look at the different platforms and what is described throughout the community online to just get a firm grasp of what it is. And because I just don't have the time to do it right now. But as I'm going forward, I can tell you from my heart, being a senior now, I have had some awesome experiences: Capitol Hill, the Smithsonian, the FAA, private sector, boards and other entities, and then with Compto. I got plenty of life experience to draw from. My Hill experience, and I guess for me, the ultimate Hill experience was the time I spent with Congressman John Lewis. I was his first legislative director, and had the awesome responsibility of bringing the whole issue and bringing the legislative package to Mr. Lewis to create the National African American Museum on the Mall. First of all, very proud of that accomplishment. From the time that I started to the time that it happened and was dedicated was 23 years. And sometimes you just gotta wait. You have to wait on that slow walk as you go forward. But things happen and things improve as you go forward. And again, I worked on a couple of staffs of other minority members of Congress. One great man who was just totally unsung, a guy named Julian Dixon from the great state of California, who got the LA Metro started. He was on the Appropriations Committee, and he was the one who begun the whole process of bringing funds to get the LA Metro started, and was a great mentor to me when I was a very young man. Bobby Garcia from the South Bronx enabled me to do some innovative things with students, Hispanic students, and getting them to familiarize themselves with the aerospace industry. I took a group of 40 young people down to the launch with, for the first Hispanic to fly into space, Franklin Chang Diaz, along with our revered Charlie Bolden on their first flight at the end of 1985. Boy, that takes me back. So, and again, but most recently, I was very proud to serve as the subject matter expert on equity for the transition team for the Department of Transportation, and gave me a little more exposure. And I would hope that as we went forward, that they heard the voice from myself, from the minority community, from Compto, from AMAC, from the other important communities that deal with the whole issue of equity as we went forward. And I was not shy about holding my tongue about the issue. And I will not be shy going forward about dealing with this issue. Not only shy about being the person that has the bully pulpit here, but making sure as we go forward as an agency, as a Department of Transportation, that we remain committed to making sure that persons from the African American community, as well as others from other communities of color, are afforded opportunities. And it's not like this whole concept where you have, you think of affirmative action, but in the process of you going forward and making sure that those persons that you are affiliated with and associated with are moving forward with you, whether they be women, whether they be people of other persuasions. You want to just make sure that those people who are in your orbit, bring them with you as you go forward. And it's not a hard thing to do. So as you go forward, make sure that your universe is diverse. It'll just make you richer as a person. So I just want to make sure that as we go forward, I want to keep the industry vibrant. And I want this industry to be vibrant for people of color and for African Americans. And, one last point is, we can't find anybody in your community. I can. And if you reached out to some other people of color and African Americans, they can find people for you. So what I want to make sure that I do is to keep that bully pulpit, keep that horn loud as we're going forward, and make sure that the efforts that we are dealing with and making sure that we bring people of color into the Department of Transportation, to the FAA, that we get our young people motivated and to take off into space. So let me just stop there. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you so much, Brad, especially for sharing all of your career experiences, especially with Representative Lewis and all of the other leaders that you mentioned. That's really a wonderful richness that you've shared with us. And I also really appreciate your story about how long it took to get the museum done. It's a great lesson for us not to give up.
Right.
It does take a long time. I don't know if before I move on, do you have any ideas or thoughts about things that you found that don't take that long, that we can do that might push things along more quickly?
Well, you know, again, as we're going forward, and again, I think in this whole effort, there is some patience that you have to have, because again, we're dealing with students and we're dealing with people who are coming along to hit a pipeline and hit the pipeline as we go forward. So that things that don't take so long, again, initiatives within the agency that we have some jurisdiction or authority to and with, that we continue to urge people and to educate our colleagues about the importance of equity, of racial equity as we're going forward. Because if you don't involve other people and everybody's like-minded, you're going to keep getting the same result. And oftentimes the same result makes you stagnant. And also that same result makes you less safe. We are in the business of safety as we're going forward. So listen to varying opinions, listen to people from other communities that you're in, to make sure that those opinions are part of whatever challenges, whatever solutions that you may have to come up with. That's all.
Great, thank you so much, Brad. I'm sure we'll have more questions for you as we go.
I'll come up with some, okay.
And so now I would love to move on to Warren Whitlock, who is formerly with the Federal Highway Administration in the Office of Civil Rights. So Warren, I'll ask you, kind of the same sort of general question is, how would you define the problem that we're dealing with and addressing? How have you experienced it in your career, for better or worse? What changes have you seen? And you might want to comment in particular about some of the things you did at the Federal Highway Administration that helped things along in this area.
And thank you so much. And thank you so much, TRB, for inviting me to speak. Yeah, this is a great topic. And I'd just like to say that, when I started my career with the federal government on September 11th, 2011, as the Associate Administrator for Civil Rights at Federal Highway, it was a great experience and learned a lot of things, but also was able to do things to help open the aperture for opportunities. So just to give you sort of some highlights, I prosecuted, the first Title VI case at Federal Highway that found a municipality in violation of Title VI. This was out in Beaver Creek, Ohio, basically a bus route going through a community, bypassed the Black community, sent an investigator out. We found them in violation of Title VI and made them comply. First time in Federal Highway's history. So unique was this decision that Ohio State University actually did a documentary, an award-winning documentary called Free to Ride. And I suggest people, watch that. But as Brad was saying, recognizing opportunities to open up the aperture. When I was at Federal Highway again, I sponsored the first Hispanic employment plan for Federal Highway, which was enacted. We had, and Brad, I want to share this with you, the National Summer Transportation Institute program, which is a voluntary program with state DOTs, will give money to colleges and junior colleges to take young kids in high school and junior high to learn about civil engineering. Now, no offense, Ann, because I love my engineers. But what I did was, my colleague who is no longer at Federal Highway, but my counterpart, Mamie Mallory, I said to her, because FAA has, a flight academy during the summers. And I said, can we combine these programs in areas where there's, close proximity, which we did in a few states, and kids loved it. And I say no offense, because they did half the time doing civil engineering highway, half the time doing aviation. And every time I went to visit some of these kids, they were all like, oh, we love aviation. The highway stuff's a little bit hard for us. In addition to that, I expanded the program to include American Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas. The first time ever that the program had been expanded to include the AAPI community. And so, as we talk about, how to sort of increase this aperture for young people, particularly people of color, African Americans, Latinos, Asians, I think that we have to look at the programs that we have inside and see about how can we, number one, make the law comply with, with what they're supposed to be doing. Number two, what can we do internally to expand the programs that we have to make them, more compliant? And also, another thing I want to talk about, with Title VI and the expansion of Title VI, I kind of got the reputation of being a change agent at Federal Highway and DOT. We had a case down in Corpus Christi, Texas, where Texas DOT was building a new bridge, through Corpus Christi, and the southern approach to the bridge slammed through a Black neighborhood. And TxDOT, I'm not trying to point a finger at them, love all the state transportation agencies, but they were following the NEPA rules versus the Title VI rules. And so we had an 11th hour meeting with DOJ, with TxDOT, my Texas division, and all the divisions of Federal Highway, to say that, look, we have to do a Title VI investigation here because, these people's rights were being impinged upon. And so when we talk about, how to expand opportunities, there's also the aspect of the law. How do people in communities know that they're being given short shrift, right? Those folks in Beaver Creek, Ohio, they may not have even known, hey, we can go to the city council complaint, we can file a Title VI complaint with Federal Highway, and Federal Highway will do something for us. So recognizing those mechanisms. But, to your end, Anna, I'm going to, look at you, because I noticed that, not only are you a PhD, but you're also a PE. And in my experience, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, but I have the most respect for engineers, particularly engineers who are PEs, because you've done that extra measure to enhance your career, to essentially say, look, I'm a player, I know my business, and this is what I do. I always tell people, shoot for the moon, shoot for the moon, shoot for the sun, be able to look at, fields of endeavor and go to the highest point that you can go, because in that, not only will you sort of rise through your career path, but you also be seen as a subject matter expert in your area. So, to Brad's point about, creating a pipeline, doing as much as we can do, the opportunities are there. Just one last point before I be quiet and, take questions. I also think that when we talk about civil rights, in the federal sector, it really is important for the engineers, the people who do the core business of the agency, the engineers, the planners, the architects, to understand what civil rights is. I mean, because basically a lot of the way that these federal agencies are constructed is that the civil rights officers are separate and distinct from people that do the core business. At the end of the day, it's the engineers, it's the planners, it's those folks who do the core business who really need to understand, the civil rights implications of the work they do. So I think it's incumbent that as we advance civil rights, we're thinking about opportunities for people who've historically been left out of the mainstream, that we also think about how do we educate and incorporate these principles and these practices into the core business of the folks that do that work. So that's what I want to leave it at, and we'll take questions from there. Hopefully that was decent.
That was great. Thank you very much, Warren. Unless I missed it, I think you were focusing on the federal agencies, but are there things you would tell the state agencies about how they might look at what they're doing a little differently when they're planning or designing a project?
I think number one, state agencies, have a lot of good people who are hardworking, and they really need to, again, focus on equity and balance. We know that it's the local state agencies who design the roadways, who design, these different transportation modes. They have to make sure that they're doing it in a fair and balanced way. This is when the law comes in. Every state agency, every state transportation agency, every local transportation agency has a civil rights organization, a civil rights unit. And those units really need to be brought to the table when plans are being, thought through on how to design a new project, how to think through, how do we engage the community in various ways. So the community is aware, of what the processes are. So, I talked about my federal experience, but certainly before I came to Federal Highway, I was the civil rights director at New York State DOT for 2.5 years. So I recognize the state implications as well and what has to happen there as well.
Great, thank you. In fact, we do have a question from the audience on how to better integrate civil rights into the design process. So I think you're starting to answer that, but I want to see if Brad has anything that you might want to add.
Yes, I have a very pointed answer to that. From part of this has to do with communities of color being proactive about their communities and making sure that they are visible in the planning process. And one thing that I have been struck by is that oftentimes communities of color don't hear about things that are coming that will impact their communities until they know the bulldozers are coming. Well, you know, 5, 6, 7 years before that, you have a process to deal with the whole issue of planning. And we want to make sure, whether it's in whatever mode that you're in, that people, and again, I put the responsibility back on the state agencies to make sure those state agencies are communicating with communities of color about their intentions to build roads, to deal with maybe rail or other modes of transportation, to make sure that communities of color are being included in dealing with their whole outreach effort. And that you know, some do a great job, some do a lousy job. And we want to make sure that as we go forward, and I know Warren has been an advocate in making sure that people in communities of color and underserved communities are apprised of what's going on in dealing with the whole issue of projects that will impact their communities.
Great, thank you so much. This webinar being sponsored by the Council of University Transportation Centers. I'm sure we have a lot of academics in the audience. Do you have any thoughts about how we can encourage more people of color, Blacks in particular, into higher education?
Again, from the bully pulpit, if I can put it that way. And we have organizations like AMAC, COMTO, many of the African-American nonprofits that reach out to the community, but reach out to young people. And I can't emphasize it more, that young people who are caught and given an opportunity to think about what they want to do in 6th grade through 12th grade, I think will benefit more than anything. And again, it's that pipeline that's going to lead people into our universities and other research oriented institutions that will draw African American and other people of color into those institutions. But the effort has to be made to talk about aerospace, to talk about highways, to talk about engineering. And those persons who are in those spaces presently have to have the heart and the commitment to go back and reach back into those communities, because if they don't see people who are doing it, you don't necessarily have to be a person of color, but you have to see somebody doing what you think you may want to do as you go forward. And I'll just talk about my own experience. Again, I'm a lobbyist by trade, but when I was in high school, I got this little job in my senior year to work in the Office of Government Relations at the USDOT. And the people in that office took me under their wing, and they showed me the path of what I should do to become an effective lobbyist, to become an effective person to deal with government relations issues. And they explained to me my gates, the tranches that you have to go through to get to where you want to be ultimately. So it's about people who are willing to, again, start in dealing with young people in those young years, if I can put it that way, and bring them up through into just where you are as a PhD in the industry, and just like many others, make sure that they're going to do what they need to do.
Great, thank you so much. I guess that really does speak very much to the transparency and demystifying aspect of all of this. You can't assume that everybody knows how everything happens if they haven't grown up seeing it. Chandra, do you have more audience questions that I should hand over to you now?
Yes, we do have audience questions, and
Okay, go
happy
ahead.
to read them. So one question, Brad, I think just picking off what you just mentioned, what can we do to be a better ally to our Black colleagues? Many of us want to be supportive, but are not sure how and what would be most effective.
Well, I think as we go forward, and I think Warren could speak to this too, we need to look at the opportunities that are in our immediate paths, if I can put it that way. And you take an agency like FAA or an agency like FHWA, there are programs that are in all these agencies that deal with the whole issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, in the past, you know, FAA's focus on workforce issues has been internal, but over the years, that really started to evolve. And again, we've begun to recognize that FAA has a key role to play in the future of aerospace industry as a whole. So, I mean, starting from that macro and coming down, there's a lot of interest in the Congress. Congress has directed FAA to ensure that we do what we need to do to have a robust workforce, diverse pipelines for the industry for the future as well. And again, let me just talk about what Steve Dixon did, and I have to give him some credit here. He, you know, the federal government was given in this last administration, they were told to cease and desist all activity with regard to diversity and inclusion. Well, the FAA kept moving. And within the FAA, we recently finalized a corporate STEM AFSET strategic plan. One of 4 main goals in the area is to promote STEM for every student. And again, that means a larger emphasis on how we can expand our effective outreach to a broader range of students. And again, one specific example is where we look forward to working with the industry in our Adopt a School program, again, that we piloted last year and look forward to launching across the country in FY22. Again, one of the key focuses, a focus area in this program will be identifying schools to adopt, to allow access to a broad diversity of students. And again, we'll work with the industry partners when we piloted this program, and we'll look forward to continuing that type of cooperation moving forward. And again, we are implementing, and we're moving forward in implementing an agency-wide diversity and inclusion plan. So, and as me coming in, I'm going to, again, stand on that bullet pulpit and make sure that people are clearly understand what's going forward. And I compliment what folks are doing at FAA right now. And again, we'll draw those dotted lines to the other agencies within the USDOT to make sure that the same thing or the same kind of thing, you know, is happening throughout the USDOT.
Warren, do you have any additional thoughts on this issue? And also a related question, how do we integrate equity inclusion into an organization that has never focused on this in the past?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chandra. Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to add to what Brad had mentioned. Certainly, at Federal Highway and as well as FAA, all the transportation modes, we have to also remember that there is a federal program, the DBE program, which in many ways is the entryway for minority contractors into these transportation construction fields, horizontal construction is certainly, road construction is certainly a lot different from vertical construction in the sense that, the pay items are a lot larger in highway transportation than they are in building buildings. But I think that, folks who have that type of trade, that type of bent, surely should look at the DBE program as an entryway. The same thing with on-the-job training programs, which I know that we funded at Federal Highway and I believe at Aviation as well. Giving people who are historically underserved an opportunity to work on these types of projects and to learn, how to work on these types of projects. So that has always been, a really big entry point for folks in the transportation modes. Yeah, how do you create equity in an organization that doesn't have it? A lot of it is education, Chandra. Let me just say this, and I hope nobody out there gets upset, but when we talk about diversity and inclusion, just mention those two words, and people immediately go black, white, male, female, affirmative action, EEO, right? And those are components of D&I, but they're not the complete, package. And as I mentioned before in the work that I did, I'm, creating opportunities, Hispanic employment plan, or expanding the NSTI program to AAPI communities out in the Pacific territories. I'm from New York City, so my whole orientation is very diverse. I always try to build a big tent, and so educating these organizations, Chandra, as to what equity really means, what diversity really means, because at the end of the day, it's going to be a process that everyone benefits from. Like the example I mentioned earlier with Corpus Christi, can you imagine what the earthquake would have been if TxDOT had tried to just build a bridge and not have gone through, the community engagement process in Title VI? It would have been a disaster. And just before an election year, come on. So, I'll just tell you a story out of school. I was at TRB meeting last year in 2020 before the pandemic, and my old office was given a civil rights presentation. And, I'm talking with the woman I hired, brilliant, PhD lawyer that I hired, who had managed the Corpus Christi situation. And as we're talking, somebody from TxDOT walks over and says to her, "Oh, so good to see you. Thank you so much for helping us out during Corpus Christi. We have an $8 billion project now that we need your help on." And so having gone through that process with TxDOT for Corpus Christi actually enabled TxDOT to recognize what they needed to do. So it's an education process. It is a process where people should enter into. It's not a gotcha moment. It's not pointing fingers. It's not trying to hang people up. It really is trying to tell organizations the right way to do things, how to be inclusive, and how at the end of the day, it's going to help your bottom line. So it's that whole process of getting to understand what this is. Because one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. As we move into this era of Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, that's a big focus. And certainly, I love my Black people, right? But, this movement is not just about Black folks, right? This is about everybody. And I always think about, what are people who are non-minority, non-women, underrepresented, what are they thinking about the future? And as we talk about diversity, as we talk about greater equality, we have to include everyone because, some folks don't see where the future is for them, right? And that can be as much of a challenge to overcome because, folks are already skittish about this. So if we're not making any kinds of overtures to say, look, this is about all of us moving forward together as a great, diverse country whose strength is our diversity, that's going to be a big problem for us moving forward.
You talked, Warren, about expanding and being inclusive. It's not about one particular community, it's all of us together moving forward. One question that's come up in the chat box is we have been talking about getting people into our profession. We have been talking about specific communities, but on a larger level, as you were alluding to, Warren, what can we do to retain these individuals who are currently underrepresented in our profession, within our profession? For example, many women and people of color seem to leave the industry after about 5 years, even after they enter the industry. So what do we do to retain these people? And related to that, how can we as universities also enrich our research and try to retain some of the PhDs in the academic profession and even beyond?
Okay, so I'm going to speak from my experience, not just at transportation, but at the Pentagon, working for the Army. The whole retention factor is quite important, right? The private sector might be paying more dollars than the public sector, right? Quite honestly. I think that there needs to be analyses done to determine, what people's, rate of attrition is from these jobs. Where are the opportunities? Are people being promoted fairly? Are there more dollars to make outside of the organization? Is the work stimulating enough? Is the environment healthy? These are very, important questions to ask and to be aware of, because people, obviously make decisions based on their own personal growth factors and what they feel comfortable with. And if an organization spends time analyzing, sort of the retention rate, you'll come up with factors as to why people are leaving. Are organizations even doing exit interviews when people decide to leave? And that's a very good data point, right? So to answer your question, more needs to be done in a self-reflective way. Bring on, D&I consultants, bring on or create an office of D&I that has autonomy and independence and reports to the top person in the organization, and have them, do that type of analysis and that type of work. I look at D&I as being very closely equated with employee engagement. If people are feeling happy and good about what they do, they're going to stay. In the federal realm, as you probably know, Brad, I'm sure knows, you talked about Charlie Bolden. NASA is the gold standard in the federal agencies. And one of the stories they tell at NASA is, you ask the janitor at any of these, NASA operations, what do you do? Why do you do what you do? And they'll say, because we're getting people up in space. They know what their mission is. And as as someone who is really focused on, these organizations being more inclusive and diverse, this type of analysis needs to be done. As I mentioned, the thing with TxDOT back at Federal Highway have been doing that for years. And I'm not pointing a finger at folks. They got into a rhythm where they're following NEPA, not following Title VI, and no one ever told them, hey, look, that's not the right way to do things. Sometimes it takes that internal self-reflection to be able to understand we need to change our protocols in order to be more inclusive. So that's what I would recommend, to your question.
Brad, go ahead.
Chandra, one other thing, and again, sometimes we have to be directed to do those things. So we need, and one thing that was very clear to the Congress and others is that women in the aerospace and aviation industry were not being given the same opportunities as our male counterparts. And again, we have 2 congressionally mandated advisory committees at FAA now. It's the Women in Aviation Advisory Board and the Youth Access to American Jobs in Aviation Task Forces, led by a young dynamic woman named Angela Anderson. And again, the goal is to bring more women and students into aviation and aerospace careers. And again, I'm looking forward to the recommendations that will be passed down over the next year and working in partnership with the industry to implement those changes. And again, I'm a big fan of STEM, including strong emphasis on forming more or stronger partnerships as we go on with organizations like Women in Aviation International and the Organization of Black Aviation Professionals. Organizations like TIE. We're gonna tie ourselves to everything that we can possibly do in the industry to make sure that folks are informed. And again, as from me, I'm a multimodal guy. I love aviation. Aviation is my thing, but I love all of the modes of transportation. And Warren will tell you, got to have your fingers in everything, and you have to look to the other modes to deal with best practices as you're going forward. Some of the smaller modes have the better practices sometimes, and sometimes you got to kind of garner those ideas that they have into what you do and what you plan to do as you go forward. So I'll stop there.
So a quick question, perhaps a last question, and this is something that I was talking with a reporter yesterday about the Biden-Harris ambitious infrastructure plan. And, you know, the interstate system in the 1950s and 60s is held up as a beacon of mobility, of economic prosperity, which it all was, without a question. No one would question that. But I think that, you know, no one would also, or most people would not question that it did exacerbate, you know, inequity, where certain communities, Black communities in particular, being disproportionately displaced. What would you suggest we can do as, you know, universities and even on the broader administration end from you all, as we roll out this, as the Biden administration rolls out this new plan, what can we do?
Be a part of, you have to be a part of that implementation, if I can put it that way. Many of our stakeholders are going to be called upon on the, for the diversity and equity executive order to participate in and on panels to deal with what we're going to be calling Justice 40, to deal with all of the really very complicated issues that are going to face us going forward. And I will tell you, there's a cadre of young, very bright people at the USDOT. Irene Marion, who runs the Civil Rights Office, Christopher Coles, who runs he runs a policy shop. They're a sharp bunch of young people who are pulling this whole effort together, and they are going to challenge not only people internally, but people externally as to what we need to do to come up with a comprehensive strategy to attack the issues of dealing with our communities. I was really struck, and I want to just finish up with this one issue. New Orleans, I know New Orleans really well. And Warren, you'll know this, the I-10 going through Claiborne Avenue. I remember when they built that in 1968, and my relatives were part of that displacement. And then, so I was saying to myself, they're going to tear down Claiborne. They're going to tear down the I-10, but they're going to make a boulevard and deal with the whole issue of making sure to bring that community back together as we go forward. But the one thing that I want to make sure of is that we don't get tricked into dealing with the whole issue of building that boulevard for that whole community to be gentrified as it goes forward. So as we're going forward, there are a number of issues that we're going to have to deal with as we go forward. But just wanted to toss that out. Warren, let me be quiet so you can finish.
Yeah, no, I just want to say one thing as we close. Folks should read The Power Broker by Robert Caro. You learn a lot about eminent domain. And go watch Free to Ride. Google Free to Ride. It's about 90 minutes, great video. Not just because I'm in it, but it really talks about the same issue that we're talking about now with eminent domain and, you know, communities of color being left out of the mainstream in transportation.
Yep.
Great. Well, I think we have come to the end of our time today. So I'd like to thank our speakers, Brad and Warren, for spending this time with us and sharing their unique experiences and perspectives. I think we learned a lot. I certainly did. And I'm sure our audience realizes what a privilege it is to have so much experience and insight delivered to us in such a compressed time. I'd also like to thank Chandra, Tracy Ulberg, and Carol Lewis and the whole steering group for providing this opportunity to us. And thank you to our audience for your attention and your great questions. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.